Long ago, when the universe was far less chaotic, and the Zargoth Empire hadn't yet fully stretched its claws across every corner of the galaxy, the Silith were a proud, independent people. But all that changed once the Empire came. Now, under the Empire's rule, the Silith barely existed as a shadow of their former selves. Every day was a fight for survival, a fight that had nothing to do with freedom, only with enduring another day under the cruel hand of the Zargoth. The Empire's dominance was absolute. They controlled everything, from the food rationing system that barely kept the Silith alive to the surveillance drones that hovered constantly over the labor camps. Every move was monitored, every whisper overheard. The Silith language, once rich with art and culture, was outlawed. Their ancient texts were destroyed, their schools repurposed to teach only what the Zargoth allowed. For many, the thought of rebellion was a distant fantasy, something told in hushed stories from generations long gone. Each day, the Silith toiled in the labor camps, breaking their bodies to mine the precious minerals the Zargoth coveted. The mines were deep, dangerous, and suffocating, a place where hope rarely ventured. One fateful day, a group of Silith miners, working deep beneath the surface of their planet, uncovered something unusual, a door hidden under centuries of debris. The door led to an underground facility, ancient in design and long forgotten. It wasn't Zargoth technology, nor was it Silith. This was something else, something they had never seen before. The miners, wary of Zargoth punishment, hesitated. Reporting something of this nature would surely bring more suffering. The Zargoth would claim the discovery for themselves, and the Silith would remain in chains, or worse. After a heated debate, they decided to explore the facility in secret, hoping that whatever lay inside could somehow change their fate. Deep within the facility, they found a sealed pod, unlike anything they'd ever encountered. It was covered in markings and symbols that were unrecognizable to them. The technology, clearly advanced, was far beyond anything the Zargoth or Silith possessed. Curiosity got the better of them, and they began investigating the pod. They couldn't understand the controls, but by sheer luck, or perhaps destiny, one of them triggered the activation sequence. Lights flickered on, the air hummed with power, and a soft hissing sound filled the room as the pod slowly opened. Inside lay a human, preserved in perfect stasis. The miners stepped back in fear and awe, unsure of what they had awoken. The human stirred, his eyes opening slowly as if from a long, dreamless sleep. His confusion was palpable. His name, as they would soon learn, was Captain Alex Morgan. He had been in stasis for centuries, perhaps even longer. The Silith watched as Alex tried to make sense of his surroundings, clearly disoriented by the alien faces around him. Communication, at first, was impossible. They didn't speak the same language, and without a way to understand one another, the situation grew tense. Among the wreckage of the facility, they found an old universal translator. After some effort, they managed to get it functioning. With it, they could finally speak. The miners told Alex about the Zargoth Empire, about how they had destroyed their culture, enslaved their people, and crushed any hope of freedom. Alex listened intently, piecing together the grim reality of the galaxy he had awoken to. For Alex, the weight of the situation was staggering. Not only was he far from home, but it was also likely that Earth no longer existed, at least not as he had known it. Humanity's fate was a mystery to him, and he feared he might be the last of his kind. Despite this crushing revelation, Alex's mind immediately went to work. His military training kicked in, and he began assessing the situation with a calm, calculated demeanor. He asked them questions about the Empire, how they operated, where their weaknesses might lie, and whether there had been any efforts to resist. The Silith, though hesitant, shared what they knew. They spoke of small, failed uprisings, each one brutally crushed by the Zargoth before it could gain any traction. Despair was woven into their words, a sense of hopelessness that had become part of their very identity. But Alex wasn't deterred. He saw something in these miners, something they had long since lost sight of, the potential for change. Where they saw only oppression and defeat, he saw opportunities. He knew from humanity's own history that even the most formidable of oppressors could be toppled if the oppressed had the will to fight. And the Silith had the will, they just needed someone to show them how. Alex assured them that the Zargith, like any empire, had weaknesses. No power was unshakable. He told them of humanity's long history of struggle and rebellion, of how they had fought against seemingly insurmountable odds time and time again. And while it might take time, he believed that the Silith could do the same. The miners were skeptical at first. They had been crushed for so long that the idea of resistance felt like a distant dream. But Alex's words sparked something within them, something they hadn't felt in years: hope. For the first time in a long time, they saw a path forward, no matter how dangerous it might be. And so, with Alex at their side, they began to plan. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but as the humans stood before them, the Silith felt that perhaps, just perhaps, the tide was beginning to turn. Alex took time to understand the Silith, immersing himself in their world. He knew that if they were to stand any chance of fighting back against the Zargith Empire, trust would be crucial. The Silith had been oppressed for so long that many had forgotten what hope felt like, and Alex needed them to believe in more than just survival. Zealer, the historian who had taken a keen interest in Alex's knowledge, became his closest ally. Through Zealer, Alex learned the intricacies of Silith society, how they had once been scholars, artists, and engineers before the Empire's iron grip stripped them of their identities. In return, Alex shared stories of human history, tales of rebellion and resilience. He told them about the great revolutions on Earth, where small bands of freedom fighters had toppled regimes far stronger than themselves. He spoke of humanity's refusal to submit, of how they had fought against tyranny, even when the odds seemed impossible. These stories resonated with the Silith. For many, it was the first time they had heard of such defiance, and it planted a seed. If humanity had survived such trials, why couldn't they? As trust grew, Alex began evaluating the resources available. The Silith had little to work with: basic tools, a few outdated pieces of technology, and whatever they could scavenge from the labor camps. But Alex had been trained in situations like this. He knew that revolutions didn't start with weapons, they started with tactics. He introduced them to the idea of guerrilla warfare, small-scale operations that could disrupt the Zargith without directly engaging their overwhelming forces. Sabotage, he explained, would be their greatest weapon. They didn't need to win battles, they just needed to make the Empire bleed, little by little. The first test of this strategy came with a plan to sabotage a Zargith supply depot. It wasn't a grand operation, just a handful of Siliths slipping in under the cover of darkness, placing explosives at key points, and retreating before anyone noticed. But when the explosion ripped through the depot, it sent a shockwave through the labor camps. The Silith had done it. They had struck a blow against the Empire, and they hadn't been caught. For the first time in generations, there was a sense of triumph. Word spread quickly. The Silith, who had long believed resistance was futile, began to whisper about what had happened. More individuals came forward, asking to join the cause. The movement grew in secret, with cells forming across the labor camps. Each cell operated independently, so if one was discovered, it wouldn't jeopardize the others. Alex made sure to keep their operations small and scattered, never drawing too much attention to any one place. As the rebellion gained momentum, Alex encouraged the Silith to reclaim parts of their identity that had been lost. It wasn't just about fighting, it was about remembering who they were before the Zargith came. He urged them to revive their traditions in secret. Art, music, stories, everything that had been banned by the Empire was now shared in hidden gatherings. These moments of cultural revival became a source of strength, reminding the Silith of their heritage and giving them something to fight for beyond just survival. The Zargith, though initially oblivious, began to notice small anomalies. Minor accidents at factories, supply lines delayed, communications disrupted. But they underestimated the Silith. To the Empire, these were the actions of a disorganized and broken people, nothing more than nuisances. They attributed the incidents to incompetence, or minor acts of rebellion that could easily be quashed. Their complacency allowed the Silith to grow stronger in the shadows, as more and more joined the cause. But not all were convinced. Some Silith, especially those who had seen the worst of the Empire's wrath, were hesitant. They feared the repercussions of rebellion, knowing that the Zargath could unleash devastating consequences if they realized what was happening. Alex understood their fear, but he also knew that the cost of inaction was far greater. He didn't sugarcoat the risks. Rebellion would be dangerous, and there would be losses. But the alternative, continued subjugation, cultural erasure, and the slow death of their people, was even worse. He reminded them that no freedom came without sacrifice. The tension between action and fear grew as the rebellion became bolder. Alex knew that they needed a significant victory to solidify their position, something that would shake the Zargatha's hold on the region and give the Silith even more confidence. After weeks of planning, he proposed an ambitious attack, the sabotage of a key Zargath communication hub. This hub was crucial to the Empire's operations, allowing them to coordinate their efforts across the sector. Disabling it would not only disrupt their immediate control but also send a message that the Silith were no longer afraid. The plan was dangerous. The hub was heavily guarded, and any mistake could lead to the entire operation being exposed. But Alex believed the risk was worth it. They had reached a point where small victories weren't enough. The Silith needed to see that they could stand toe-to-toe with the Empire, that they could strike at the heart of the Zargatha's power and still survive. As the final preparations were made, the tension among the Silith was palpable. This was the most significant operation they had attempted so far, and failure would mean not just the end of the rebellion, but the likely extermination of their entire species. Yet, as Alex stood before them, calm and resolute, they found strength in his confidence. He had led them this far, and they trusted him to lead them through this as well. The rebellion was no longer just an idea. It was real, and the Silith were ready to fight for their future. As they prepared for the attack on the communication hub, the sense of unity among them had never been stronger. But beneath that unity, there was still fear, and they all knew that the true test of their resolve was yet to come. The attack on the Zargath communication hub began under the cover of night, with Alex and a select group of Silith rebels sneaking through the surrounding terrain. It was their most significant mission yet, and despite the risks, it had to succeed. They knew the consequences of failure, but the hub represented a crucial piece of the Zargatha's control over the sector. The operation didn't go off without challenges. Midway through, the team encountered heavier resistance than anticipated. 2 of their members were injured, and for a moment, it looked like the mission might fail. But Alex, keeping his head cool, adapted to the situation with quick orders, ensuring the explosives were placed correctly. As the charges detonated, the hub's massive antenna collapsed, cutting off vital communication channels across the region. The Silith rebels had struck a blow that would be felt across the Empire. It was a victory, but the sense of accomplishment was tempered by the realization of what came next. The Zargath wouldn't take this lightly. In the following days, the Empire's response was swift and brutal. Reinforcements poured into the sector, with more soldiers patrolling the labor camps and stricter curfews imposed on the Silith. They conducted raids, searching for anyone they suspected of being part of the rebellion. Innocent Silith were rounded up, and public punishments became common. The Zargath aimed to make an example of anyone who defied their rule. For the Silith, it was a difficult time. What had been a moment of triumph was now overshadowed by the Empire's crackdown. But for Alex, this was merely the start. As the Zargath forces tightened their grip, Alex's plans grew more aggressive. He saw that the only way forward was through continued escalation. The Empire would not relent unless they were forced to their knees, and in Alex's eyes, that meant taking the fight directly to them. Alex began proposing new targets, but these weren't military installations. He suggested attacking Zargath's civilian centers, places where the Empire's citizens lived and worked. To him, they were part of the machine that kept the Empire alive. By striking fear into the civilian population, Alex believed they could disrupt the Empire's internal stability. He also suggested targeting Silith collaborators, those who had aligned themselves with the Zargath in exchange for favors or better treatment. These individuals, Alex argued, were as much enemies as the Zargath themselves. For many of the Silith, these tactics were shocking. Zealer, who had become one of the rebellion's central figures, was particularly disturbed by the direction Alex was taking. While they had always known there would be sacrifices, targeting civilians and collaborators seemed to cross a line. Zealer and other leaders began to question whether they were losing sight of what they were fighting for. Were they fighting for their freedom, or were they becoming something just as brutal as the Zargath? But Alex was unmoved by these concerns. He had seen the lengths to which oppressive regimes would go to maintain power, and he believed the only way to win was to be willing to do whatever it took. He introduced advanced tactics and weaponry, things he had learned from his time as a soldier. The Silith rebels were now better equipped, but the methods they were being asked to use were more ruthless than ever before. The breaking point came during a mission that Alex led to sabotage a supply route. The goal was to disrupt the flow of goods to the Zargath military outposts, but in the process, collateral damage ensued. Several Silith civilians who had been forced to work near the supply line were caught in the crossfire. When the dust settled, it was clear that while the mission had been a strategic success, it had come at a heavy price. Families mourned their dead, and whispers began spreading through the camps that the rebellion was costing them too much. Zealer, who had watched these events unfold, confronted Alex. He couldn't ignore the growing divide between the rebellion's original purpose and the path Alex was leading them down. He questioned whether they were any different from the Zargath if they were willing to sacrifice their own people for the sake of victory. Zealer reminded Alex that they had once been a proud and peaceful society, and losing their morality in the pursuit of freedom would be a hollow victory. But Alex saw things differently. To him, the cost of freedom was always high. There were no victories without sacrifice, and in his eyes, the Silith's survival depended on their willingness to make those sacrifices. He argued that the Zargath would never stop unless they were forced to. If innocent lives were lost along the way, it was a tragic but necessary reality. To Alex, the ends always justified the means. This growing divide between Alex and the Silith leadership became more pronounced as the situation worsened. The Zargath Empire, now fully aware of the threat the rebellion posed, began preparations to deploy a devastating planet-wide weapon that would end the uprising once and for all. The Silith had a choice to make: continue the fight, risking total annihilation, or seek a truce and hope for mercy from an empire that had shown none. As the rebels prepared for what could be their final stand, the tension was palpable. The question hung in the air: how much were they willing to lose for the chance at freedom? And at what point did the costs become too great to bear? Alex remained steadfast in his belief that victory was still within reach, but Zealer and many others couldn't shake the feeling that they were teetering on the edge of losing themselves. Even if they won the war, the final confrontation was inevitable. Alex had seen the writing on the wall long before the Silith had fully grasped the gravity of the situation. The Zargath Empire was preparing to wipe them out, to crush the rebellion once and for all with a weapon so devastating that resistance would no longer be possible. Alex knew they couldn't wait for the strike to come. His plan was bold, reckless even, but it was the only option left. He proposed a direct assault on the heart of the Zargath's command structure, an attack so audacious that it would either lead to their ultimate victory or their complete destruction. The Silith leaders hesitated. There were many who feared that this final push would cost them everything. The rebellion had already claimed countless lives, and the thought of losing more weighed heavily on their hearts. But annihilation loomed, and the alternative was submission and extermination. In the end, they agreed. There was no other path forward. They would follow Alex's plan. The battle that followed was nothing short of chaos. The Silith forces, armed with what little they had, threw themselves against the might of the Zargath with a ferocity they hadn't known they possessed. Explosions tore through the sky, fire and smoke engulfing the battlefield as the two sides clashed. For every inch they gained, the Silith paid a price. Key figures, those who had been with Alex since the early days of the rebellion, fell in battle. The losses mounted, each one cutting deeper into the spirit of the fighters. Yet they pressed on, driven by the belief that this was their only chance at freedom. Amidst the carnage, Alex was unrelenting. His commands were precise, his focus absolute. He led the charge, his every action calculated to bring down the Empire from within. The Zargath forces, taken by surprise at the sheer audacity of the attack, began to falter. The Empire, once believed to be invincible, was crumbling before their eyes. And when the final blow landed, the Zargoth command structure collapsed. With their leadership in disarray, the grip they had on the galaxy weakened. The Silith's victory sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy, igniting uprisings in every corner. Other oppressed species, long cowed by the Zargoth's dominance, rose up, inspired by the Silith's success. The empire that had once seemed unshakable was now falling apart. But victory came at a cost. The battle had left the Silith world in ruins. The infrastructure that had once supported their society was destroyed, and the lives that had been lost were irreplaceable. The celebrations that followed were muted, haunted by the weight of what they had sacrificed. Freedom had been won, but it didn't feel like a triumph. It felt like survival. The Silith were free, but their world was broken. Alex, having fulfilled his mission, prepared to leave. The Silith begged him to stay, to help them rebuild what had been lost. But Alex refused. He had never intended to be a leader for long. His role was to guide them through the fight, not to rebuild their world. His work was done, and now it was up to the Silith to forge their own future. As he prepared to depart, there was no grand farewell. He slipped away quietly, leaving behind a legacy of both liberation and destruction. In the days that followed, Zealer found himself reflecting on the transformation of his people. They had fought for their freedom, and in the end, they had won. But what had they lost in the process? The Silith had once been a peaceful, scholarly people, valuing knowledge and culture above all else. Now they had become warriors, their society built on the ashes of battle. In fighting the Zargoth, they had adopted many of the same traits they had despised in their oppressors. Ruthlessness, pragmatism, a willingness to sacrifice anything for victory, these were not the values the Silith had once held dear. And yet, here they were, forever changed by the war. Zealer couldn't help but wonder if Alex had seen this coming. The human had always spoken of the cost of freedom, the sacrifices that had to be made. But had they lost too much? Had the price been too high? The Silith were free, but they were no longer the people they had been before the rebellion. Their identity had shifted, and Zealer feared that in gaining their independence, they had lost something far more valuable, their sense of who they were. As he sat among the ruins, Zealer thought back to the first time he had met Alex. The human had been a beacon of hope, a symbol of resilience and strength. But there was a darkness to him as well, a willingness to go to extremes that had always unnerved Zealer. Now, in the aftermath of their victory, Zealer understood what Alex had represented. Humans had an immense capacity for greatness, but that greatness was always tempered by the potential for destruction. They could inspire, they could lead, but they could also devastate everything around them in the pursuit of their goals. Zealer's final thoughts on Alex were conflicted. The Silith would never forget the human who had helped free them. His influence had shaped their future, for better or worse. But there was a warning in his legacy, one that Zealer hoped future generations would heed. The Silith had gained their freedom, but at what cost? In the pursuit of victory, they had come perilously close to becoming the very thing they had fought against. As Zealer sat before a group of young Silith, the next generation who had been born into this new world, he told them the story of Alex Morgan. He spoke of the rebellion, of the battles they had fought, and of the human who had guided them through the darkest times. But he also warned them. The pursuit of noble goals should never come at the expense of one's values. The Silith were free, but they had to be careful not to lose themselves in the process. The legacy of Alex Morgan was a reminder of both the power and the peril of human tenacity.